So this is part C. The previous one, part B, was a short one, 10 minutes, but this one is going to take a bit long, and it is going to be longer. And there is this Times of India, New Delhi edition of today, Sunday the 9th of May 2021. And what is visible in the Times, the English version, the Hindu, is the absolute dominance of their coverage on the front pages. The Hindu, Times of India, by completely dishonest items about the Supreme Court. And any visitor from Mars, that is to say, anyone who is not familiar with the corrupt Indian government, an Indian government machine, would be excused if they thought that the Supreme Court ran the country. Because what Modi is doing, while he is committing multiple crimes, violating and causing massacres and deaths of people, Indian people, his frontage is completely left untouched by any attention by the so-called media. And the Supreme Court is put there as the guard, as the facade. There are two dishonest things in there. One is that it gives the impression that everything the Modi is doing is legal or legally verified and therefore legitimate. And the other thing is that where can you go? You can't hide. I mean, if Modi is chasing you, violating your rights and so on, you can't then go run to the Supreme Court to stay alive, as happened with this man, this cab driver. This cab driver, who is on the front page of the Sunday Times, India's Sunday Times. This cab driver, Lakshman Singh, died on Thursday after moving High Court earlier in the day. It's the Supreme Court or the local High Court. It's one of the courts. Now, it is beyond parody and beyond sickness, as in stupid. How can a country operate as a country, as an administration, by expecting dying people to go to Supreme Court to apply for emergency provision of health care, which is what happened to the Lakshman Singh, this Minika, the cab driver. So the cab driver who went to court for ICU bed, dead. So he died before the order of the High Court in Delhi could be implemented, which ordered the regime to provide ventilator on an emergency basis. And the two lawyers that acted for him, Manoj Gahlaut and Varun Jain, had dealt with similar court cases, applications on behalf of other people. And much smaller news item on the left column of the front page of the Times, Sunday Times, is a brief on the copy that is printed in detail on page 11. An editorial in medical journal, The Lancet, that talk about the English, the British medical journal, The Lancet, quoted estimates by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, a global health research institution, that said India could potentially see 1 million deaths due to the pandemic by August. That is an admission by the Modi supporting, Modi peddling, BJP peddling Sunday Times. And it's a small item. It's talking about the 1 million people in India will be dead by August. And there is this main item is about the Supreme Court ropes in experts for National Task Force to overhaul allocation of O2 to states. Now, this is the Supreme Court doing the central government's job. Why is it the Supreme Court every day? And it is the Supreme Court has become part of the Modi regime. And it's a corrupt part of the Modi regime. And the Delhi situation is that there is only supply for 5 days, supply of stocks, medical stock. So Kejriwal is asking for the central government, Modi, for 2.6 crore doses for blanket coverage. And there is another small item just above the 10 workers killed in Andhra Pradesh quarry blast. There is this piece of Modi, who has held the first meeting since 2013 with the European Union about business deals, etc. And India is asking the EU's help with all of that. And the daily average of cases since February is going down, it says. And there are bits and pieces all over the place on the front page and the rest of the paper about various aspects of failures and various aspects of the disease. But there is not one single item that actually tells the truth about Modi being the main one responsible for the spread and the fatalities. And again, there is nothing from the opposition, not from the Nehru family, not from any other opposition. Locally in West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee is busy recovering the state from the ravages caused by Modi assault and the BJP assault of the last few months. And Mamata Banerjee has been specifically giving details of her measures for helping women in West Bengal. And there is a perversion in the sense that Mithun Chakrabarti, who was actually born in Barishal in Bangladesh and is one of the better known actors in India, is now joined the BJP. I mean, that is his complete perversion and degeneration of Mithun Chaudhary. And it shows the lack of direction, political direction, on his part and on the part of so many Indian film actors and actresses who have been recruited by the BJP as a deliberate part of the propaganda. Now, let's look at the whole of the Indian tsunami and ask this question. I mean, what is the point of India spending billions of dollars worth in rearmament and in military preparations? I mean, this question can apply to other countries, including Pakistan. And the question is related to the actual behavior, actual conduct, actual efforts by any of these countries to reduce tension and thereby to reduce the need for military expenditure and to divert the military expenditure into creating and providing a health and care system that is fit for the country and the people. I raised this question and we shall elaborate on this in due course later, not necessarily in this edition, but we shall be doing this. This is again a world exclusive diagnostic contribution by us. There is a piece in the Daily Record. It's a Glasgow newspaper of 2 days ago. Well, Daily Record yesterday, 8th of May, Saturday. And it is running the front page, is Saturday's Daily Record, that is, about the woman identified as woman F. It's a statement by her husband, which is highlighted here. It's impossible to move on. My wife is a shadow of her former self, incapacitated by depression. Now, this is a piece about Alex Salmond. And although the case against him, based on the allegations that he sexually assaulted women while he was first minister, this account by the husband of the woman, because she's the one that actually started the whole thing against Alex Salmond by making the claim against him, that then brought out other women that made similar allegations against Salmond. Now, what this piece is saying is that the woman is psychologically, emotionally so depressed that she is no longer able to do the things that she used to do very well before this whole thing. And this is something that her husband is saying has been going on for several years, since she first raised the kind of alarm or raised the complaint or filed the complaint against Salmond. Now, of course, Salmond had been acquitted and had a series of exchanges legal exchanges, that is to say, court-related exchanges with Nicola Sturgeon, who was his deputy before he quit and she became leader. And they were very close as SNP members and leaders. Now, what is happening is that Alex Salmond, after the acquittal, he launched a political party called ALBA. ALBA is another name for Scotland, let's say. And he's just announced that he's no longer going to seek election to become an SNP MSP, because the performance on Thursday by the ALBA party has been much poorer than he had probably thought it would be. As a newly launched party, no matter how high profile the founder, Alex Salmond, is, for a party to take root and get kind of traction in electoral terms, it takes much more than a few months. So Alex Salmond has found out that electorally he cannot contest, he cannot compete with the existing parties, let alone the SNP. Now, that raises the question of the scenario that Boris Johnson has created. It's an intentionally created smoke screen. He's inviting Nicola Sturgeon to a thing he is now calling Team UK. Remember the Team Brexit? Let Brexit get done. This is a similar thing, but this ploy deserves to be condemned out of hand. And Nicola Sturgeon must boycott this and make her counter offer containing all the grievances and discontents that the Scottish people have been feeling for a very long time against the England-centric, racist liars that have nothing but contempt for the people of Scotland. And the contempt was consolidated by Cameron, who is as racist as Boris Johnson, who has been as racist as Boris Johnson, and who introduced the anti-democratic, fascistic and racist anti-Scottish and anti-Scots measure in the so-called constitution, making it, barring Scottish members of parliament from taking part in the decision of the House of Commons, decisions that affect mainly parts of England. That is an absurdity that completely kills off any idea of a united kingdom, a union. So Johnson has to, I'm telling Sturgeon or the Scottish National Party people, they may not agree with me or they may not take my advice, but I'm giving them the correct advice nonetheless. And my giving the advice is not related to their approval or not. This is my observation. This is the diagnosis, and this is what I'm saying should happen. And Sturgeon should demand, instead of just repeating IndyRef 2, she should make a series of demands based on the racism, failures, discrimination, unconstitutionality, including the imposition of the lies, the Brexiteering lies, because the Scottish people didn't want to leave the European Union, regardless of the fact that in Scotland itself, there have been many that would want the UK as a whole to leave the EU because of the propaganda and so on. So my advice to the SNP at the moment is to shun Boris Johnson's latest stunt. It's a complete smokescreen and totally contradicting everything else they have done against Scotland and against the Scottish people and the Scottish people's say in the affairs of the Union that they are now trying to salvage. And that actually shows a real crisis that being recognized by Johnson, that the UK will collapse. After 300 plus years, the United Kingdom will be no more, and it will be brought about. The UK would be destroyed by the Conservatives. Now, if there were any ideal moment full of opportunity politically to be applied by the opposition, this was one of the main ones. But Starmer is dead politically, and Starmer has murdered the Labour Party politically. So there is no utilization politically of Johnson's weakness in the weekend of his triumph. As Matthew Parry said in the Times yesterday, Johnson is making very unrealizable promises and he should be exposed, but there is nobody to expose him. But we are exposing him on the evidence, on the narrative, on the world exclusive commentary here from the KhoodeelaarTV campaign based in East London, defending the community in East London and from the East End of London. Now, when Tony Blair exploited the stupidity of John Prescott by repeatedly making him do the nastiest things against the working class and the poorest parts of society, in return for his being retained in the bogus post of Deputy Prime Minister. None of the observers, that is to say, so-called political observers in Fleet Street or in the BBC or any broadcasting outlets, none of them pointed out what I have just summarized, that Blair was brazenly and craftily and poisonously exploiting John Prescott's vulnerabilities. Because Prescott always felt that he was not, he didn't belong to the ruling class. So any bits and pieces of the feeling of being in power did him no end of sense of achievement, he felt. And that is what happens with the traitors of the society, traitors across the various classes and various groups and groupings. Prescott was abused and exploited by being falsely recruited to the rank of Deputy Prime Minister. And in his uncontrollable sense of achievement and arrival, Prescott the moron did the dirtiest things against the working class and against society that suited the conservative right-wing agenda of the Tony Blair regime. And the worst things that Prescott did in policy terms included attacks on the concept of council housing, social housing. So it wasn't tampering with the social housing. The target was chosen to destroy it. That is to say, Tony Blair wanted to destroy social housing altogether. And Prescott obliged. And what he did in Tower Hamlets represented the actual agenda. And the Tower Hamlets council housing stock, a very large number of the housing stock was transferred under false pretense and with false promises, transferred to the gang organized to exploit the housing crisis, called Khoodeelaar. And Khoodeelaar now controls billions pounds worth of property that belong to the council, that is to say, to the community. Now, none of the promises that Prescott got Tower Hamlets Council's then ruling clique to make in order to entice, lure, and hoodwink and mislead people to agree with the transfer of the housing stock. None of the promises that the people, tenants and residents were given has been kept or honored. And those promises were not meant to be honored. One of the promises was that everything to do with the housing estate and the council housing estate would get better. Repair service, which was terrible when council controlled these properties, would be raised to the standard beyond the dreams. Antisocial behavior would be tackled. And the general overall provision of service and maintenance would be absolutely fantastic. Now, this is the kind of list that is designed to mislead masses of morons, brainwashed people. And in the way that they supported the transfer, so-called ballot, was very much like what the referendum, staged referendum has been. We shall come to the details of the way that they staged the referendum, because it was a decision made by the John Biggs-fronted cabal and shown as a decision by the council to hold the referendum, and it was completely falsely constructed. And previously, Biggs and his agents sabotaged the ordinary electors' petition. That would have had a stronger impact on the referendum, because of the process itself would have formed part of the canvassing and campaign, explaining to people why they have to sign. So similarly, in the 2004 to 2006 transfer lies by Toronto's council, the council promised impossible and intentionally misleading kind of deliveries of service by the Poplar Harka, the first main recipient of the largest stock, housing stock that belonged to the council. The social rent was completely abolished, and the properties became properties like in the ordinary market, and the valuations appropriate or according to the market considerations, the valuations were attached. While all of this was going on, not a single sitting councillor, remember that was 2004 to 2006 in the main, and it was 4 years, at least 4 years before the elected councillor corruption post was foisted. But as the billions worth of properties and resources were being given over to the gang of criminals, not one single councillor of any background raised the issue that this was robbery taking place. Think about this. And so therefore, what happened in 2004 to 2006 about the housing stock transfer also happened during the 2009 and 2010 petition for holding a referendum on whether Toronto's council should have an elected mayor. Because the Labour Party, which in Tower Hamlets remains numerically the biggest party, the Labour Party members, the bureaucrats in the borough, lied on all the issues concerned and misled the people, and it was intended to produce the result or outcome to give the people a false sense of assurance and security with the transferred status of the housing stock and its tenants and residents. There was no debate. There was no debate whatsoever about the impact of all of this on the community. There was no debate about the role this was playing. In effect, thousands of council properties were being turned into private properties. It's like another massive corruption of the housing stock and council housing that had been originally perpetrated by Margaret Thatcher, who introduced the corrupt and absolutely antisocial, anti-societal measure called the right to buy. And the right to buy was intended to banish the social concept and the social content of housing and usher in housing as a market, as a marketable commodity. Now, housing is a right, and converting it into a marketable commodity immediately took away the rights of those who didn't have the capital to trade their housing stock with. So the council housing was essentially intended and meant for people in low income and in other socially deprived categories, locations, and connections and environments. By removing the council concept, the public sector housing concept from the ownership of these properties, Tower Hamlets Council introduced a permanent blight on the estates that was removed from the areas of duties of the council, because these estates belong to Poplar Harka, not to Tower Hamlets Council. And the equation is not the same between what Poplar Harkar was obliged to do and deliver and what Tower Hamlets Council was obliged and remained obliged to do and deliver. So therefore, there was no forum, there was no mechanism, and there was no kind of deadline by which the council was required to account for its corruption, big, massive, multi-billion pound corruption and collusion with the crooks in the Poplar Harka. Now, it has never been published or publicly stated whether any councillor was on the payroll of Poplar Harka crooks, because there was not a single councillor who raised a single question against this transfer of council housing stock from the control of Tower Hamlets Council to the disposal of the gang of criminals who were not obliged to the community because they were not part of the council. They were an independent business disguised as a kind of not-for-profit or something like that operation. So that council housing stock gone. And now democracy completely buried in Tower Hamlets. And if it wasn't for me organizing the Khoodeelaar campaign to stop the Crossrail hole, then the entirety of Brick Lane would have been destroyed. The Brick Lane that we know would have been destroyed by 10 years of Crossrail construction disruption, delay, incompetence, and lying. They started in 2010, about 2010. So 2010, it was supposed to go on for 8 years. It is still going on. 8, 9, 10, 11, 3 years too late. And there is no sign that Crossrail, the actual line going to the east in Essex, is going to become operational. And none of the councillors, remember, none of the Tower Hamlets councillors ever said one single thing in defense of the community and in support of the campaign against the Crossrail hole. But a number of councillors, and during the 2006 council election, a number of councillor candidates lied by claiming in indirect ways that they were part of the Khoodeelaar campaign? Because the profile of the Khoodeelaar campaign was at the highest level and it was instantly recognizable as defending the community. Anyone who even dishonestly claimed to be part of the Khoodeelaar campaign was immediately given special recognition by the target of that kind of false claim. And the reason they could make any claim was because the Khoodeelaar campaign did the work that would have required dozens of people otherwise. And there is a clue again as to what actually constitutes the multi-billion pound claims that remain outstanding against Tower Hamlets Council and other crooks. And the fact that these councillors said nothing exposed them to the risk, very serious risk of losing any council election that they stood in. So in order to keep their jobs and careers, they pretended to be sort of sympathetic to the community. But they never came across in any significant way. And going back to the Channel 4, which broadcast several episodes of how to get a council house in Tower Hamlets. That was one. Muhammad Haque getting the housing stock another. And the silence about Crossrail is another. And we can add several years before that, because when I mounted the campaign to stop the Inner London Education Authority's plot to convert the Marlbury School for Girls into a mixed-sex school, again, neither Tower Hamlets councillors nor Labour Party members supported the campaign. In fact, it was reliably stated or claimed, to my knowledge, that a number of people in Tower Hamlets among the Bangladeshi community were given thousands of pounds as a bribe by the Inner London Education Authority, using whatever fraudulent device they did use, in order to go around the very addresses of parents of the girls in the school where I had been collecting signatures as part of the constitutional law action to stop the proposed mixture. And the brief was that these bribed individuals would go intentionally equipped with defamatory utterances about myself so that they could persuade the parents and guardians to not sign my petition, which was the petition required by the Constitution to be filed, duly signed, to stop that proposal, which I successfully filed and was not prevented by the briefed, poisonous defamers. They did issue and utter various negative things about me personally, invented things and lies, but they didn't succeed because I did manage to get the requisite minimum number of signatures And I submitted this, delivered this at the Department for Education at the time. And so therefore, not once, Tower Hamlets Council has been repeatedly, openly engaged in anti-society, anti-community, anti-the electors, maneuvers and manipulations and misdeeds and misconduct and wrongs. And without exception, every single one of those attacks on the community via Tower Hamlets Council has been opposed by me. Think about that. Think about that and think about the actual impact and the implications for the community. So the attacks that I have listed in a big way are not the exhaustive list. There were attacks, other attacks, and there continue to be attacks even now on the community. So I give an example. The attacks on the rights of the people in the community generally via the misrepresentation of their claims, their needs, and their kind of entitlements. This goes on generally every single time, and the council doesn't deliver the normal services to the community that the council exists and is funded to deliver. So that's not just a big item like the attempted conversion of the Mulberry School into mixed sex school, but individual cases, individual connections and contacts with the council employees, not necessarily councillors. And there is no accountability for any of the failures, negligence, and bias, discrimination, incompetence by the council. And the council also has clear, defined role about safeguarding the communities. Community safety, for example, the police. And there is the accountability. So to this day, and since the council, Tower Hamlets Council, was created in 1965 by the merger of Stepney Borough Council, Poplar Borough Council, and Bethnal Green Borough Council. These three were merged to appear in April 1965 as the London Borough of Tower Hamlets in the merged form. Despite the merger, the culture of corruption that prevailed in the three smaller boroughs persisted. So, from 1965, as we calculate, 75, 85, 95, 2005, 2015, and this is 55 decades plus. Over that long time, long period, the Tower Hamlets Council that came into operation in April 1965 has been a corrupt local borough council. One of the most corrupt borough councils anywhere to be found anywhere in the UK or in England. And the corruption has not got better. That is to say, the corruption has not gone down over the years. The corruption has got worse. And the fact that all the councillors, even before the foisting of the elected mayor criminality, that even before that, councillors were free to raise questions and to represent truthfully the interests of their constituents. That it was possible to do did not mean that it was delivered. When we look at all these issues, because these are one-sided issues in the sense that our campaign has been the one defending the community, which has been attacked repeatedly, betrayed repeatedly by the elected and funded council that was supposed to be doing the protecting of the community. Think about that. So we have listed some of the main ones, but I can say that we have been doing our campaign, our movement has been the only one doing the defending of the community over decades, covering everything: education, housing, employment, racism, and institutional corruption by every agency, and the incompetence and the illegality of the council itself. Now, going back to what the licensed law trader, currently an MP, the Conservative MP from Surrey, Robert Neil said about Lutfur Rahman and his abuse of his position and his abuse of the position of the monitoring officer and his abuse of the services of the monitoring officer and the actual money available to hire private investigators in order to harass two of Lutfur Rahman's critics on the council. One, Peter Golds, and the other, of course, was Josh Peck. And the third person who was targeted by Isabella Freeman for a series of attacks on Andrew Gilligan. And the only reason why the council's monitoring officer was engaged in a private series of attacks to protect Lutfur Rahman from criticism was because Lutfur Rahman was being criticized both by Andrew Gilligan and, of course, by Josh Peck and Peter Golds. This is something that is recorded by Hansard. Let's see what Hansard has recorded. Now, here is a piece, it's this month, May 24th, 2014. And it has got the tags Elections 2014, Extremism, IFE, John Biggs, Lutfur Rahman, Tower Hamlets. And this is Andrew Gilligan writing on 24th of May 2014 that he is a senior correspondent for the Sunday Times at that time in 2014, that is. Previously at the Telegraph, the London Evening Standard, and the BBC's Today program. And then it says he is a winner or nominee of various awards, including the Paul Foot Award, the Orwell Prize, Amnesty International Media Awards, British Journalism Awards, and Foreign Correspondent of the Year and Journalist of the Year at the British Press Awards. Winner 2008, nominee 2015. And then he says, I am also head of the Capital City Foundation at Policy Exchange and a former cycling commissioner for London. This is my personal blog. And he says this site includes archive posts published on my Telegraph blog between 2009 and 2014. The paper has now closed all the blog sites. So links in the posts to Telegraph blogs, including my own, don't work. But you can find anything of mine by using the search box below. And so on. So he's written, currently is written about this return of Lutfur Rahman, but at the time that Robert Neal gave that speech in 2013, Gilligan was very much part of the campaign against Lutfur Rahman. So he's got an item by item, chapter and verse rebuttal against Lutfur Rahman in response to the piece promoting Lutfur Rahman that the Guardian had published. So that they've got. Let's see where he takes this. Now there is a very long list of items that Andrew Gilligan actually refers to as related to Lutfur Rahman's wrongdoing. Now what we have to say, in view of the fact that less than 18% of the electors in Tower Hamlets apparently voted to scrap the mayor system. And nearly 70 or 70 plus percentage points went in favor of the retention of the mayor system. And as we have been saying earlier today, the mayor system is the last thing the Tar Hamras community needs, because it's a dictatorial, corrupt and corrupting, secret and secretive kind of post that any criminal-minded person can land, thus destroying so much of the community. So we shall be talking more in the next parts, because we are doing the detailed examination, remember? And we shall name names and we shall cite events in order to make it clear. This is world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. What we are saying there about Tar Hamlets Council and the mayor system is, of course, substantially being broadcast in that form because there is a policy of denial of the corruption, anti-democratic behavior and criminality that Tar Hamlets Council is and Newham Council is. So we shall be talking in detail, and we shall be quoting criminals like Steve Hill and criminals like Colin Cormack and criminals like Kevin Collins and liars like Jonas Williams.